I've waited, I know why I'm blue. Waiting, dear, for someone exactly like you. Why should we spend money on a show or two? No one does those love scenes exactly like you. You make me feel so grand.
As a wonderful Count Basie band exactly like you. Lucky Jim, of course, as I said, I mean, that was your first novel, and that,
yes.
I mean, started you off. I mean, none of this stuff about starving in garrets for you and sending in manuscripts being rejected.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, I rejected one. Yes, well, so did lots of publishers. It's really my second novel, Lucky Jim. Nobody's ever going to see the first one.
Really?
And my God, nobody's ever going to see it. I'm taking care of that. Oh, it was appalling.
Really?
It was turned down by, half a dozen publishers, and very rightly. Years later, I ran into the chap who first turned it down at a party, very crowded. We only had time to shout two things. He shouted to me, "I'm terribly sorry," and I shouted back, "You were quite right." So it's true that when Lucky Jim was done and delivered, the first publisher to see it, Victor Gallant, published it, but only after some delay. Victor wasn't at all happy about it, really.
Why?
He thought it was uncultured, anti-cultural. And it was his nephew, Hilary Rubinstein, and Livia Gallant, who pushed it through.
Of course, it made your name, didn't it, immediately?
Well, yes. I mean, I've got no complaints, but it was a little bit gradual. I mean, the name came before the sales, really. It didn't start to be read in much numbers until it had been out a year or two. Then it did.
Because you were then labelled with the group of writers became the Angry Young Men, weren't you?
Oh, yes.
I could never quite work out what that was all about, could you?
Not really. As I said at the time, I didn't think I was angry much unless I hit my thumb with a hammer, And I think it was a piece of literary journalism. You know how people like to have a pigeonhole.
Yes.
They say, he's one of that lot.
Yes.
And it means you've slotted him, and you needn't really think so much about how he might or might not differ from his contemporaries. And it looks rather quaint now, that little episode, but it was useful to me at the time.
Very usefully, I mean, commercially, of course, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, it was quite an exciting time in the literary world there, wasn't it? I mean, all kinds of new novelists coming through, new attitudes toward the novel.
Delayed a bit. The war had been over for, when I started writing it, for half a dozen years, but I think everybody was sort of exhausted by the war, and in my case, was celebrating not being in the army anymore. It's quite a time before people got round to some serious work, and when they did, there did seem to be a sort of new wave. I was thinking about the Angry Young Men and so on. What they had in common was none of them had public school accents. And that was really quite rare before the Second War. I don't know if there's any great social shift or what the reason was, but it did happen that way.
Of course, the people they wrote about didn't have public school accents either, did they? I mean, your heroes were entirely different.
Aggressively not, yes. And, of course, many more people think that I'm a Yorkshireman than think I'm a Welshman, because Dixon, he wasn't a Yorkshireman, but he came from the north, simply because he couldn't come from London, could he? Because everybody else's hero had come from London.
Did you base Jim Dixon on anybody?
Well, no. Are you going to say that you've heard it was based on Philip Larkin?
On Philip Larkin, yes.
Only at the start. I thought, yes, that would be funny, as a way of avoiding writing about oneself, in a way. And he's called Dixon because Philip had digs in Dixon Drive in Leicester, where he was librarian at the university. But as soon as I started seriously, all that went by the board.
When you look back at that point in your life, Kingsley, you must have very pleasant memories, because not only Lucky Jim, but you wrote That Uncertain Feeling, I Like It Here, Take a Girl Like You. I mean, 4 very, very good books in that period down in Swansea there. You must look back with great affection.
Well, I do. I think there's 12 years in Swansea, minus 1 year in America, as we were saying. I think that was my best time, really. I made so many friends so fast. So I lived a very active social life, but working too. And I was in top gear all that time.
Another choice of record.
Nobody admires Tchaikovsky's First Piano Concerto more than I do, the one that everybody knows. But you haven't got to look very far before you find that there's a second one, and there's actually a third one, which nobody ever plays. And, the first movement of that second piano concerto of Tchaikovsky, though recognised by the same man as the first concerto, is, I think, quite different in approach.
And the soloist is?
Emil Gilels.
Kingsley, let's bring your interview right up to date, in fact, because we talked about the first book, Lucky Jim, and now we're in a situation where your 16th book, The Old Devils, you in fact won the Booker Prize. Tell me, there's a lot of hype around the Booker Prize, an awful lot of publicity.
Yeah.
It's the one time of the year when novels get talked about, actually.
Sure, yes.
Does it mean an awful lot to win it? In commercial terms, I'm talking about, not...
Oh, commercial terms, very much so. There's the, what you might call the primary money, like primary picketing. The prize, which is 15,000 very useful pounds. And there's also the secondary money, because more copies get sold by far than would otherwise have happened. Abroad as well, and it has effects everywhere. It'll increase American sales, and it makes the Dutchmen and the Norwegians and the Italians more generous with their advances.
Wonderful.
So there's all that.
The critics, too, have been, generally speaking, very, very kind. I mean...
oh, yes, marvellous.
Burgess said, writing better than ever. Do you think this yourself? I mean, do you feel that you are writing better the older you get?
I can't possibly tell. I mean, I'm, as it were, the last man who can tell. I had butterflies about this one, and about the last one, more extreme in this case. I mean, I'm not the sort of man who tears up books he spent years on, but I came closer with this than anything before. Seems I needn't have bothered, but I mean, the only thing you can say, but you don't learn much by writing a lot of novels, because each attempt is, you have to start again. You're back on square one. Absolutely. There are one or two little tricks of the trade I think you learn. You learn how to handle transitions more smoothly, get your characters without fuss from one scene to the next, one place to the next. And you become better at covering up your weaknesses and exploiting what virtues or advantages you may have. And you get better at what might be called the tip of the iceberg con.
What's that?
You imply that you know everything about such a subject. For example, I try to imply I know everything about Eisteddfods and that sort of life in Wales, and all about the chapel, just by quoting 2 or 3 little bits. The implication being, I could tell you all about it if I had room. But I'm just letting these little bits out. So that's the tip, but there's a huge iceberg. Of course, there isn't really any iceberg.
Are you writing another novel at this moment?
Well, Michael, really, I think I might be allowed a week or two off to think about these and to enjoy myself and Royster and so on. But yes, I mean, I'm very lucky. I mean, every novelist's prayer is that before he's quite finished with novel A, some little intimations, thoughts, inklings of novel B are beginning to trickle into his head. And all you can do is to keep your fingers crossed and hope for that. If it's going to happen, it will. If it's not, too bad. But I'm still touching wood a bit, as you see. That started to happen quite quickly, 6 weeks after final delivery, before this one was published. And that's a vital thing.
Another choice of record?
Well, I always greatly admired, as soon as Philip Larkin brought him up in conversation, Pee Wee Russell. Right. I think if I had to plump for one outstanding jazzman, it would be him. And again, I'm not too tedious about Larkin, but I remember Larkin saying, what's all this talk about, Picasso and Ezra Pound? Surely Pee Wee Russell is the greatest living artist. So here he is in Eddie Condon's Strut Miss Lizzie.